introductions. So I will advance the screen here for you, Michelle, but thank you
Great.
everyone for joining us and welcome. And Michelle.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Welcome. So we're in the middle of SUNY National Distance Learning Week, as you can see. It's all this week. And, thanks for joining us today. It's, a day off for many of us, and I suppose we'd be remiss if we did not acknowledge the day and acknowledge the valor and service of our veterans. So let that be said, SUNY is certainly grateful as a community. Many of our students are veterans, as are many of our colleagues and faculty and staff. So let's say that. Can you go to the next slide here? So here's our bow tie picture, right? I knew it was coming. I previewed this. So I'm very happy to announce our colleague, introduce our colleague, Jeff Dugan from Finger Lakes Community College. Jeff is an instructional designer and he's an adjunct instructor at FLCC. And he is going to share his take on using best practices of asynchronous online learning to synchronous online learning. I've worked with Jeff in a few projects, and I'm eager to hear what he has to say and his perspective. So Jeff, who's not wearing his father's clothes, we've established,
yes.
Take it away.
All right, let's do this. And I'll make sure, Michelle, that everyone can see this beautiful orange slide that's made to wake everybody up this morning. All right, perfect. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much, Michelle, Aaron, and SUNY for letting me participate in National Distance Learning Week. It is so exciting for me to be able to share my experience as an instructional designer. Not only for our institution, but I'm also the lead instructional designer for the SUNY Online initiative on our campus. This is my first semester as an adjunct instructor, fully online, asynchronous. And so, learned a lot just in these last few weeks. I'm also a graduate student at Buffalo State Community College in adult education. So I'm going to be spending this for a master's degree, I think, a little bit, because I think this is a kind of a culmination of all my learnings from those different experiences. So thank you so much for having me today. We're going to go through a couple different ideas and best practices, but I want to make sure we give proper framing for what we're talking about. I spent the whole summer, it felt like, getting Finger Lakes ready, just coming up with definitions of what these mean. We spent a lot of time making sure that people understood what we were talking about when we were saying asynchronous, synchronous, what these terms mean, what they really apply to when it came to learning environments. And I actually had a really great experience over the summer to work with K-12 instructors. We have a large Gemini program, a concurrent enrollment program at Finger Lakes. And so they needed our support as much as our on-campus faculty did to get students ready to be successful in this new modality. And the summer was robbed from all of us, right? I mean, if we work in the field, we had to spend the summer getting ready to do this. And so one of our first meetings, we had a discussion around definitions. And I'm not going to read you can probably see the definitions there, but what I'll share about asynchronous work is, to me, it is that traditional online learning model. And it's weird to say online learning and traditional. You can tell how new I am at all of this, that online learning is traditional to me as a type of learning modality. But when I described it to seasoned K-12 instructors, I described it to them as homework, right? It was fun to see educators have light bulbs, right? We always get to talk about how we see the students have light bulbs, but when the educators understand something differently, it was very cool. They understood that, right? The homework, let students go home with that and they work on it in their own time without the instructors' live intervention in the learning. So that is how I kind of frame asynchronous for K-12, and hopefully maybe a little clearer for you as well. When you look at synchronous, on the other hand, this is not new online learning, but is definitely something that we've switched over to in response to the pandemic, in response to kind of the needs of our students. So it really focuses on that real-time interaction. It is that learning environment where they have that back and forth in play. And I'll have you keep that in mind, that idea of back and forth, as we move through this. So I want to start by bringing up a recent article from Inside Higher Ed, and I've got the source link there. You'll have the slides to be able to go back and look at it. But this idea that every course should be designed as an online course. Now, I'm an instructional designer. That phrase horrifies me because that's a lot of work in my brain. But really what this does is it talks about, maybe not every course, but having a fundamental difference between a well-designed course and a course that could use improvements in its design. So they broke down, the author of the article here broke down this idea of design, of online design having 4 really great traits. One of them being resiliency, so that it can be switched between modalities quickly and as necessary. You know, we have a kind of an uncertain world right now. We don't know when we might be going to what modality, but having a strong course design will allow for that resiliency and change. Flexibility is a little different. They seem like they might be synonyms, but it's actually flexibility in the delivery method. The cat's out of the bag, right? We know that we can teach at a distance. It's maybe not everybody's first choice, but it can be done. And not only students, but faculty seem to appreciate that fluid type of learning, that meeting them on their own time and their own schedule. And I thought that was important to emphasize. Quality, this comes down to alignment. It kind of speaks to that. He really, you know, blows some smoke when he talks about how great instructional designers are in here and how we can provide quality learning. I think it's great, but it may be a little overselling us. I think that this idea of alignment, right, and structure to a course is what provides quality. So you can trace something, an idea and a topic, all the way from the larger course learning outcomes all the way down to the learning activities in the course. There's a very clear through line, and we'll talk about that in practice a little bit later on. And then extensibility, this one caught me off guard. It's a kind of a new space for me to think about. But this idea of if we work in modular-based coursework, so online coursework broken into topics and modules, we'll talk about chunking a little bit. But it makes it easier for things like credentialing and breaking out into maybe non-credit ideas, where you can take elements of the course that are very useful and share them amongst other courses or other types of learning that may be useful. So again, that one module could almost stand on its own. And that's how OER is kind of broken out. It's broken out into these modules in a way that's easy to share. So why can't your course also function like that in the design of each area section of the course, be kind of interdependent in a way? So I thought that was an interesting idea, a lot to think about there. But again, the all framework for why this is important, why having this conversation about making good asynchronous work translate over to synchronous work. So there it is, another beautiful orange slide to wake you up. And that's the question, how do we do that? How do we take good asynchronous course design and bring it into the synchronous space? And that's the question I'm gonna kind of pose to you all to think about as we're going through this, but also is a question I hope to kind of give my experience towards. And if there's any questions, I'll take a little bit of a breath here because I can feel my necktie, which means I'm getting a little too excited. So, you know, I plan on just kind of giving my take, my experience in all of this, but you all have your own experiences with maybe a class you've taken or an experience over this past summer and the spring that have challenged your way of thinking of how courses should be delivered. So you know, how do you think about that while we're going through kind of some best practices? So a concept that I want to talk about as an idea of a best practice, this idea of a suspension bridge to good course design. So there are 2 kind of pillars that hold down a good course, and that is backward design, which we'll talk about. It's a theory about how we get to alignment. We talked about earlier, it's the content of the course, right? It's how students engage, but it's also just kind of how the content is structured. And then universal design for learning, which really focuses on the learning experience, what the students are doing, looking at the humanist element of the course. How do we you know, look at the course in a way that is accessible, but not necessarily the capital A accessible, that is ADA compliancy, but that we're looking at humans. You know, there's a idea of Maslow's before Bloom's, right? That we look at the needs of our students. And so we have to remember that there is a design, there is a structure, there is, you know, we need to have this kind of hedgerow, not to mix metaphors, and I'm already doing it, but to have this design. And then we need to think about the humans that are going through it and the ones that are crossing this bridge. And those 2 can be at odds with each other, and that's the tension that holds the bridge up. So that's kind of the framing I'll give you for how I'm going to talk about these 2 best practices. I mean, how I see it in my own coursework and what I do with faculty almost every day. So let's get specifically into backward design then. Backward design starts at the highest level, and I love this. This is from the ASCD. And you take a look at the link. This is a really wonderful infographic that just kind of breaks this down a little better visually. So this is just kind of the text-heavy version of it. But I like the idea that it's asking questions around what you can do. So it works at the learning objective at the highest level. And you may be locked out from the learning objectives or the learning outcomes of the course. That may have come with the course. They're pre-approved by state ed or whatever accreditor. But the way to look at then, where do you have agency to make that change, to make that objective? It's usually probably at the module level that aligns to those learning outcomes, but they're objectives. They're specific to whatever topics you're talking about in that module. What is worthy and requiring of understanding? What is it that you're asking the students to know? And make that very objective, make it very objectifiable, make it very clear what we're asking the students to know. It was interesting when I was working with K-12 instructors, they've had a lot of pushback to this first idea. Well, we don't have any say here. This is all by our department, by curriculum. And I pushed back and said, well, every day you make a lesson plan, there's probably an objective to that lesson. So you can be at a micro level and doing this backward design, but the point is that you're doing this work first before you worry about how necessarily you're delivering your content, your material, your lecture. So this is design first. This gives you that framework then that goes into assessment, right? So the second part is determining an acceptable evidence in assessment. What evidence do the students need to provide to you to prove that they have met the learning objective? And again, more pushback from the K-12 instructors in our conversation because this seems like teaching to the test. But that is removing the agency from the objective element of it, right? That removes their ability to make changes to the outcome or the objective. And that's where, again, we had a fruitful conversation. And designing assessment, this second piece, it is fluid too. It can come in any order because the assessment should also be fed a little bit by the learning experiences and the instruction. So that you're kind of going back and forth and having that kind of conversation about what is being fed to the learners that they will be assessed on. Another example from really specific work that I'm doing in one of our viticulture classes that we're trying to build, that we're working on building, is the students need to know how to identify a whole root structure of a vine. And the assessment is a hot spot, click the spot in the root where this, element is. And the instruction learning experience is a visual drawing of every element of the root. So the instructor in her presentation is drawing and describing this experience of going through the root structure. And that's a very simple, very small case of what could be much larger. And this could be a whole course long objective that they're working towards. But this idea that it started with what they needed to know, they were assessed on specifically the parts that they needed to, and then being creative and how do we feed them enough information or give them that information so that they're interested in the material, right? I love the idea that it promotes understanding, interest, and excellence as part of this design. So this last area, it's kind of interesting. If you look at backwards design, we work all the way down to the learning experience, and then UDL takes over from there. It says, okay, all right, now we're at the lesson building. What does this do for students? How do we open this wide up for students? So I will switch over then to talking about UDL. I love the concept of UDL from an accessibility standpoint and from a design standpoint. From an accessibility standpoint, I've heard it described as a +1 model. And I always pitch this to my faculty as, you've done good work. Let's add something else. Let's add another way. Let's add another channel to students to have access to your content, right? Let's lower the threshold for people to get into this learning experience. So again, infographic linked below from CAST, and another acronym I couldn't begin to try to describe. But no, really wonderful is the kind of the birthplace of UDL beyond industry, which is where it really came from. But I'm not going to nerd out on you on all of that. The idea that we have how learners engage with the lesson, right? How they interact. What are they doing? Is it how they regulate their own learning, sustain effort and motivation, keeping them interested. Good design does that. And going off the cuff and not having that design can lose that motivation. Maybe I'm losing some of you without having that specific area. And engaging an interest in all learners. So all learners is a big feat. It's almost as big of a feat as individualized learning, but that's the +1 model in action. That is additive. It is continuing in and trying to bring more of that group into the conversation that wouldn't be there before. Presented to learners, do we differentiate how we're giving instruction? So for example, that back to the viticulture example I had before, we have that the instructor who is auditorily describing what she's drawing. She is artistically drawing out the vine instead of just a static image that she's pointing to. There's a lot of different ways to present it. She can also, give the final drawing over as a PDF. The ways that we are, there can never be enough. And I mean, that is true if you look at what the work that Ally has done in Blackboard, which is kind of an accessibility tool that we have access to. They want to give different variety of material to students because people engage differently. I will throw learning preferences out the window in the sense of learning, individualized learning, what people are driven to find that interest. Thankfully, the work I've done studying adult learners, they come a little bit well-formed and say, I know exactly how I like to learn, but not all of your learners will be that well-motivated, that interested. So you'll have to think of ways to better get them motivated, find their why. And then again, so engaging and presenting is all about the materials, but then we talk about that more formative assessment, that engagement. How are they able to act strategically? So how are they going to be able to see your math? How do they know who you are and how you're evaluating them? And how do they express themselves in that learning? So how do they show themselves to you as learners, as interested, engaged thinkers that are not being assessed in this moment, but just actively in the learning process? So all of that to say UDL is a humanist bent at accessibility. It is a way to engage learners that you may not even know you have to teach. Through this process, you open up design to a lot of variables as far as who the learners are and where they're coming from, that kind of pre-assessment, if you will, of who they are. So between those two ideas, you've got kind of a great framework for any course, I would say. As long as you're keeping these two kind of ideas in mind, this alignment and then this openness to new learning, new learners, you've got kind of a really in great shape, a good course. And that is what I mean when we're translating from asynchronous to synchronous, because these two ideas are formative in asynchronous learning. This is how you create a good course design to get through to the objectives. In synchronous, we're bringing in a whole new world of learning that come with its own challenges and opportunities. And there it is, the unique challenges and opportunities of synchronous learning. So, this is an evolutionary step in education. I really think, we talk about how education changes. I actually talk about more how asynchronous learning is changing at this point, not necessarily classroom face-to-face brick and mortar learning. We always will need something like that. We'll need the human connection. That's just part of learning. But when we look at this is an evolution of asynchronous learning. That's why I call it traditional. We're moving past a point of walls of text and really, cheesy PowerPoints with orange backgrounds and one person talking at you. So I apologize for not embodying my lesson today. But it's moving beyond that, So some of the challenges, web conferencing technology, Zoom, Blackboard Collaborate, WebEx, is replacing the idea of the lecturer. And that's in practice across my institution and through some things I've seen outside of. And with remembering the second word in that idea is conferencing. It's a two-way communication street. So we open up for questions. I can't wait to do that with you in a few minutes here, because that's something that is easily lost. And also, these tools, because of the competitive market they're in, have really lowered the threshold, made it very easy for users once they're able to get in. But that causes kind of a false sense of security for those that, for instructors that are, everything looks fine to me, everything working, the students may not have that. So we need to be aware of that challenge. And that leads into the student commitment and engagement kind of issue, where, you know, I've had faculty come to me and say, I don't like teaching to boxes and just pictures and to names. And I ask them what they're doing to engage students, and it's like, oh, well, I'm talking to them, they should listen. There's a better conversation to have there. And that is changing the way we have discussions, especially in higher education, especially at the community college level, where we have learners of a variety of needs, backgrounds, and demographics. And then, so that really gets to the idea of instructor presence. How do you teach? How do you do the thing you do? And is that going to change? Is that going to look different? It had to for some of our students. It was a wake-up call for a lot of our instructors. And some really thrived. They still ran a classroom the way they would, and they were interactive, and they did not let the technology guide them or force them into things that were uncomfortable, but they were successful. So it's just a question that you should be asking yourself as you're looking at presence. Are, you know, even as far as nitpicky as power dynamics, what are you doing in your classroom to empower students to talk to you, to engage, to open up their space, the world behind you? As you can see, I've got a very cheap plastic background here that covers my plumbing, and so I'm ruining the illusion entirely. But, you know, I do that so that I can present to you and feel empowered to do that. And the question is then, how do you do that with your students? Make them feel comfortable to not only share, but to open up their space to you. Happens in the classroom anyway. By the way, it happened in the face-to-face classroom. It just looked different, how comfortable they were. So there's some challenges, some things to think about, some opportunities that I've seen in working with faculty is using chat applications like Slack, Discord, GroupMe, etc. Chat applications go a long way. And the first kind of pushback I get when talking about this is, well, so we're just welcoming cheating now. No, we're welcoming different forms of communication with students, right? Students want that synchronous communication. They do want that, and they want that with their fellow students. They want that with you, but they may not want it in a place that puts their health at risk, or they may not want it in a place that is also being assessed, right? So discussion boards were sold whole cloth with LMSs. I think that was one of the bigger disservices we did to that tool personally, and I use them all the time. But I think that when we try to open up for water cooler discussion, things like that, we're not truly getting at the need of the student, which is have a chat, a text conversation, informal communication quickly with students. So we look at bots, we look at ways of doing it that way, but nothing really supplements the true, just honest experience we can have communicating with each other. And chat, believe it or not, the computer science department, go figure, uses Discord, which is a gaming application, to communicate with their students. And that meets the students where they are with technology. And one of our star faculty, you probably well, if you are familiar with the SUNY world in instructional design, Dave Gaddu, will not teach another course online without Discord because of the communication, because of the way he's interacting with his students, and meet them where they are and have that conversation. And because he's adept at this tool, he can moderate and watch for cheating, because your back channel exists. It exists already. You're just now owning it using these applications. Anyway, soapbox down. Breakout rooms is what allows us to get past the idea of Zoom being what I'm using it for now, which is a lecturing tool. It is a back and forth communication tool. And obviously having a conversation with 20, 30 people in your classroom is not as easy, but breaking them out into small groups and having smaller discussions and then sending them on their way is a far better use of that tool. And it speaks to kind of how intimate the online learning process can be when you are engaging on one-on-one journaling or whatever informal writings you may have. What's really nice about synchronous learning is you can give verbal instruction, right? Asynchronous learning is right now in a place of a doom spiral of walls of text. And that's growing out of that. I think this is the big push. Students won't play that game anymore, and they'll want a visual or audio instructions, but the synchronous world allows you to check in and give that instruction. It also allows you to have those informal reflection, student check-in communications that have to be built into asynchronous, where in synchronous they can say, okay, if anyone wants to stay 5 minutes, we'll have a chat and we'll talk about where we are with the course. And that's so nice and such a really great opportunity for synchronous learning and things that I've seen change the way instructors work. This is bringing in a face-to-face model too a little bit and incorporating it into this. So it is just taking the best of where we are and moving forward with it. To wrap up, I have to give credit most of this to Alex Pick, and I think I did most of my research because of her. So thank you, Alex. If you're watching this, I really appreciate it. This last thing, I'll let you guys go to it on your own. But this Open SUNY Online checklist for remote teaching takes the best of what SUNY's been doing at the SLN Open SUNY Online world and put it into a very succinct checklist. So if you are an instructional designer or your faculty, take a look at this because it's astounding. In fact, I hesitate to share it because I want a job, and this may take it. So that's almost time for me. Again, just kind of a last thought. It is one step at a time, and bridges aren't built overnight. So you take the time to really think about how you're aligning your materials, how you're working with students, and really you're going to come up with a pretty stable bridge at the end, a really good course to work with. So again, thank you so much for listening to me go on for half an hour, way too long. So please let me know if you have questions, or if you don't feel confident or want to ask now, my email is there. Please reach out to me. I'm happy to answer questions and talk about this. But yeah, the floor is yours, and I'm happy to answer any questions. If anything came in chat, I've not been paying attention, and I believe Michelle was.
I was, yep. I don't see anything in chat, but I'm wondering, I mean, we have some time if
Sure.
anyone has any questions that they would like to ask. Jeff, as long as we're here together.
And your mic should be unmuted, so you should be able to click that icon and ask, or type in the chat if you prefer.
Mm-hmm. And if you don't, I naturally have too.
Michelle, I would expect nothing less, please.
Right, right. So it's sort of, well, I think it's a comment and a question.
Sure.
I think it might be that. So not long ago, a doctoral student interviewed me about my feelings, feelings about teaching online. And for most of my career, I've taught face-to-face, though since I've been employed teaching at Empire State College, I've taught almost exclusively online with some face-to-face mixed in. And it's asynchronous online, right to the point, Jeff.
Right. So
I was honest with her, and this predates the pandemic, right? This was a sort of pre-COVID, if we can imagine, a pre-COVID question. Series of questions she posed to me. And I was honest with her, speaking of Alex, Alex and I have discussed this, Aaron and I have discussed this. And I said, I just don't feel like I can do, and it was an I statement, that I as the faculty member can do all of the things that I want to do. So we have great course designers at Empire State College. All of the things about which you spoke, Jeff, right? Our apps, the mapping is there. I've been made, I think, a better faculty member because of our course designers. I don't think we're overselling that skill set, by the way, at all. So since I've been teaching online, I think I've become a better faculty member. However, there was something, and in the process of speaking to this woman, I realized that something was humor. So it's the spontaneity of the exchanges to which I think you were speaking relative to those chat features, right? It's that piece. And I said to her, I am aware that the use of humor in an asynchronous, right, a written exchange, it's always, first of all, it's always a risk, but I can monitor the risk, presumably, when we're doing, right, when we're in real time. Then I can't do that in the asynchronous. So I wonder if you could, sort of using that as a foundation, speak a little bit more to how you see those chat functions working, right, relative to the humanization. I'm going to call it I called it humor, but maybe it's the humanization of it.
They both start with Hume, for example, right?
There you go. Let's do it. We'll go with it.
That's very, I mean, it is. I mean, I look at it as presence and personality, right? Because I'm humorless, I guess, but it is this idea that that people need charisma, something interesting to pull in their information, to bring them into the space comfortably, because there's a lot of fear in learning, right? The response of humor is a release of fear. And I see that a lot. And I'm using that as, the only way to learn is to be afraid, but there is something biological in that idea. So the chat feature, it's not, there's no saving grace for exactly that. I think if it's intriguing to you and you're interested, it's worthwhile knowing where your students are. It would be no different than me saying use AIM 20 years ago, and maybe Second Life somewhere in between there. But we're moved past that. We're long past that now. Please, we're past that. But it's the idea of meeting them where they are and interest with technology. And I think that you look at things like social media is apart from. That's not what I'm talking about, because social media is a part. It is not necessarily the learning experience. The learning experience is in community. And we talk about community building in coursework. And really, though I agree that it can be a good place for instructor presence, I like the idea that it is just community building. It is that you are there as a moderator and absolutely a personality to help bounce things off of in a way that I don't know that AI is there yet. So I'm all for pack back. I'm also very interested in that concept, but there is we need a space, this liminal space where that ask a question icebreaker evolves to. That's what I see it as, Michelle. I don't necessarily see it as transitioning lecture over or transitioning course discussion, though I think it can happen. It's that space where I have a question, I'm just going to ask the hive mind and see what comes back. And I think if you interject yourself there as someone because you still have your status as the instructor, right? That's the other thing we have to play into, is that as the instructor, you have your power, and where humor comes into power is a whole different thing, but you will be involved in the conversation that may have been hidden from you, is my other point. You are somewhere where they don't expect you to be, and that can be challenging, but also could be a place where, no, you're one of us. And especially in asynchronous, and I hear your point really well, Michelle, is this asynchronous also could be that who's teaching me? I do all of my grading in my own course, but I had my wife look at some of these papers because she's a better English scholar than I am, and she reads my work over just to make sure I'm on the right track. That is on the line, right? That doesn't happen. It doesn't necessarily happen in a face-to-face environment. You're very aware of what your instructor's doing, to the point where in K-12, you call them parents because you think you know everything about them. You are so ingratiated in their relationship that you can't separate it from the learning. Now we've separated it out. That's what's make this a two-pillar thing, not a one-pillar thing. The UDL and the course design. The UDL is the human part of it. That's the part I think, I was reading this, I was specifically looking at you, Michelle, because I know that that's your jam. That's the student experience. That's what makes a course good, is that you're responsive to students. But we're separating out these two ideas because they function in contrast with each other. And asynchronous was very course design heavy because it had to be, because it had to follow a logic. But now we have to bring in that freedom there a little bit. So did that answer your question? I went on for a while about nothing, so please help me.
No, you did. I mean, I think that, Aaron, captured the phrase that you used in the chat, the sort of presence and personality, right? Courses have personality, disciplines have personality. Sometimes disciplines have personality that individual faculty can disavow, right? Or if you talk about fear, certain courses inspire fear, and so on and so forth. So I take your point, and I've also heard, and this is particularly since COVID, that there are particular disciplines wherein we need to be thoughtful about, right, the asynchronous and synchronous pieces. Our colleagues in the biological sciences, for example, right, might have like a very different need relative to some of the concepts you've been sharing this morning with us, Jeff, versus me. I teach more in the human services, social work, humanities, right? So I can maybe have a different approach that makes sense.
And I think it's what's really interesting when I've worked in in those more hard sciences is because the students don't expect it, it's almost a pleasant surprise to have some humanity in that. I've got some really empathetic hard science instructors that change their entire, and think about that. That also happened probably in your own experience of learning. You had one instructor that just cut through that course and just spoke to you specifically. And that's what I love about UDL is it adds that with every time you do an iteration, you're adding another group of learners that you could cut through and talk to specifically. I wasn't able, and I wish I had done this in the presentation a little bit more, but one of the solutions that I bring up, and there's the dog, like perfect timing, because he wanted me to tell this point, is this idea that, why are we lecturing on Zoom? Is there a better way to do that? And the better way is to record yourself. If you want to do a lecture, record it, make it 5-minute chunks and put it up there. And then have the students come and have a discussion about it. I just think that we fall back into the comfort. This was comfortable. Like, this is the way I would present something. But if, really want to have a fervent conversation about growth and people's interests, I would have pre-recorded this, made you watch it beforehand, and then we had a conversation. But hopefully this will still stimulate conversation. I hope you'll take the resources and use them. But that's the kind of challenge to especially asynchronous, right? Because asynchronous is all about presenting materials and letting you dissect them on your own. And the challenge being, where's the community? And so like I said, this change, this COVID push, this swift switch over to synchronous is challenging more. It's not challenging the entire educational system. It's challenging asynchronous learning. And it's challenging this idea that online has to be ahumanistic. It has to be without people. It has to be more design, less people. And the argument is this is the humanist revolution inside of online learning coming into play. It is that idea that we have to be better at understanding the people involved on the other side of the screen than we have to understand the screen or the technology that's used. So
Jeff, just to highlight too, I think you've hit some really good culminating points, right? Because there's the comfort of how we've always taught and teaching how we've always taught, and just trying to transition that into this platform, right? And make it fit. And then there's the sense of really stretching our abilities and our way of thinking about learning and how students can show us their learning by stretching the experience for them and making it more engaging. And thinking about that, right? Like thinking about teaching differently and the idea that it builds the community for students, which we also need now in the COVID isolation age, right? That we're facing and our students are facing because they don't have that sort of community in other aspects on campus. Right. And, thinking about how we can just infuse that in our courses. So, so really great points.
Absolutely. And I think people are getting comfortable in asynchronous learning too. I mean, the fact that industry has brought it up around it in the last 25 years, pretty much what it's been. We see for-profits that may not be doing the most ethical things with their courses that are fully online. There is a stigma of cheating, of not really degrees from asynchronous online. And that doesn't come from these practices. That comes from something else entirely. And it's the innovation, the change that makes it better. And we're at a point where I think that online learning is changing. And at some point, in probably my career, we won't call it online learning anymore. We'll probably just call it learning. And I think that that's really where this is all going is that, like I said, the cat's out of the bag, and we're now at a place where, I'm working from my basement and presenting to all of you wonderfully. And I think that maybe not the quality of it, but the ability to do so exists. And I do this with my students all the time. So I think that, that's where we're going. And I appreciate you having me on. I love talking about it. So thank you.
Thank you. And I think that, I think that you've raised really, really timely, thoughtful, important points, as I just knew you would, Jeff. Hi. So Erin has put a number of links in the chat for us. If you're interested in saving the chat, as I did, you can just click those three little three little dots at the bottom, and you can save the chat and have all of the links live. As we noted in the beginning, National Distance Learning Week continues through the end of this week. And there are a number of other events, so we encourage you to check them out. Our colleagues are presenting all week with really great ideas, right, that we don't often have a chance to hear. Sometimes we sort of do our deal on our campuses, and this is a great opportunity to share the breadth of expertise and experience. We have the SUNY recordings and slides and schedule events at that link there. Please fill out a survey. Love to get some feedback from our colleagues. What would you like to hear more of, less of? Maybe ideas for future events. We're always eager to hear that piece. And then there's the United States distance learning events linked at that last link as well. Erin, any other thoughts to close us out? We're good?
Oh, just thank you to Jeff for your
Very much
knowledge,
so.
your expertise, for sharing and being willing to do that. And I just wish you all well and stay safe. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you all very much.
Thanks, everyone. Take care. Stay well. Bye-bye.